Good afternoon to all of our STEMinistas, family, and friends. Thank you so much for joining us today here on YouTube and Facebook Live. We have a very special guest for you, so I am super excited for this interview. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the STEMinista project, we work really hard to engage all fourth through eighth grade girls in really high quality STEM opportunities. And most of the time, that includes connecting them to amazing female STEM role models that they can learn from and be mentored by, and learn about some really great experiences that all of them have had. Today, I'm super excited to welcome yet another amazing If Then ambassador. We are super proud to be a part of this project because it's really helping to elevate the voices of so many women innovators in the field and connect them to all of the girls that we work so hard to inspire every day. So, without further ado, I would love to introduce you to our guest today, Miss Charita Castro. Welcome. How are you?
Hi, hello from Washington, D.C.
So good for you to join us today. I would love for us to just get started right away. And would you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. It's great to be with you this afternoon. Yes, I'm Charita Castro. I am a Filipina American, and we all usually grow up with nicknames if you're a Filipina. So my family and friends call me Cha, like the dance, Cha Cha Cha. My little niece calls me Auntie Cha Cha. As I said, I've been living in DC for the last 20 years, but I grew up as a military brat my formative years in Japan. And that's the intro of who I am and where I'm at right now.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I heard and had a chance to again talk to you a couple of weeks ago about some of your hobbies and things that you're interested in. I heard that you love to cook. So, can you tell us a little bit about your love for cooking? What kinds of things you enjoy preparing? Do you have a best dish? What would your family and
No.
friends say they love to eat that you make? I want to hear it all.
Oh my goodness. So I learned recently from a Filipino American researcher that the Filipino form of resistance against their Spanish colonizers was to throw feasts and eat. So I think it's in the Filipino DNA to live to eat. My maternal and paternal grandmother loved to cook, and that translated down to their children and now grandchildren. Um, so my favorite dish, I don't know, I have so many, but something that I recently tackled was this Filipino dish called sinigang. And as Amy Bessa from the renowned Purple Yam in New York has said, it's a food that's our own because we made it with our own vegetables and fruits and sours. It's got a lot of chopping. And to be fair, I don't like to chop. So my husband does all the chopping. And so that's, but I am learning how to chop. And I recently have stopped asking him to chop my onions. So I think that's a huge accomplishment.
I love that. I have a husband who does like to cook, but who does a really great job at chopping also. So kudos to all the husbands who are down for some chopping because that's not my favorite thing to do for. Well, if you wouldn't mind, since this interview, of course, is about you, but it's also really important that we hear a little bit more about your STEM journey. I would love to hear what was that one thing or 10 things for that matter that was really the spark for you? What got you motivated or interested in pursuing the career that you're in?
Okay. Well, for the If Then Ambassador program, we have to develop a STEM hook. And my STEM hook is that data can change the world. And I think that I believe it because I've seen it. And so in short, I mean, there are a lot of things that have inspired me that inspire all of us to pursue our craft. But because I grew up with a happy childhood, with parents, aunties, uncles, cousins. I'm the youngest cousin on my mom's side of like 20 cousins who are older than me. And so just feeling their love, I wanted to work on and for children so that they can grow up happy in happy childhood. So that was sort of my North Star. Now, Andrea, if we're going to keep it real, like we talked about before, I think my STEM journey in some ways had a heartbreaking beginning. As I mentioned, I was fortunate to grow up in a military family living in Japan through our formative years of childhood. And my brother and I moved to Jacksonville, Florida when we were in high school. We both experienced culture shock, but what he experienced that I didn't was overt racism. And just to kind of set the context here, this is about 30 years ago, the high school we went to was named Nathan Bedford Forrest, the leader, Grand Poobah of the Ku Klux Klan. We did not know that then. And so in his encountering of racism, he coped as best as he can, and he tried to take his life. Luckily, that didn't, it didn't, come through. And so as a sister, as a family member, you want to have your family's back. And I wanted to protect my brother. So I thought I would be that Asian American counselor or social worker that he didn't have. I majored in psychology in undergrad. I went on to get my Master of Social Work career degree. And I worked with those who were high risk of suicide on a suicide prevention hotline. I worked a rape crisis hotline, a Gamblers Anonymous. And what I learned was it was not something I had the capacity to do every day. And during this time, I was also being exposed to research in my classes. I had wonderful women mentors who encouraged me to take statistics classes, who taught me how to code. And it was through there that I discovered this love for social science research.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing those really personal details. I know it sometimes takes a lot to be, vulnerable in a live setting like this, but I think those details are really important when, we are trying to inspire the next generation, right? That sometimes the journey to where it is that we're going isn't always a bed of roses, so to speak. Sometimes there are some very real challenges that we all experience. And so I do appreciate you sharing those things. And I learned another thing that we have in common. I also answered a suicide prevention hotline of sorts many moons ago before I got into informal education and social service myself. So I do know the weight of that work and definitely can understand, the need to find other ways to express your passions in as far as supporting people. So thank you so much again for sharing that. So
thank you.
Absolutely. So in the spirit of, discussing your childhood and growing up, I would love to know, was there something in particular that you wanted to be when you were growing up? Was there something that, you had your heart set on, or that, your parents told you that you wanted to do?
Oh my gosh, I think I probably worried my parents because I was that child who just liked to play. I didn't really like school. So, when I was growing up, I wanted to be a news anchor like Connie Chung. And I think this is where representation matters. We can't be what we can't see. And so growing up, I feel like I was exposed to limited like Asian American role models, despite how great they were. So I didn't think I had a wide range of occupations to choose from. And of course, as a child, you sometimes want to be what everyone in your family is not. So, on my father's side, there were doctors and scientists, and my mother's nurses and teachers. And, those things didn't necessarily resonate with me, but I will share one story is that I think in thinking about doctors or nurses, I always saw people in uniforms. And I was like, I don't want a job where I want to wear a uniform. I want to be able to express myself. And, I would watch Dolly Parton and that 9 to 5 show. And I was like, I want a job where I can wear office clothes.
I love that. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that also. You mentioned, and we also mentioned in the introduction, that you are an If Then ambassador. And at this point, our audience has met many of the If Then ambassadors. We've definitely had the pleasure of working with some really amazing women. So I guess my question is to you. It's not so much about that particular platform, but it's more about, what does it mean to you to be an If Then ambassador? Why was this something that you signed on for?
Well, I initially didn't think I was going to apply. And then one of my colleagues, who's a Jamaican American, who we worked together to develop this Sweat and Toil app while I was at the US Department of Labor, posted it and encouraged me to apply. Because when I saw science, I didn't really consider myself a scientist. But then I looked through the description and I thought, oh, that's me, that the If Then title resonated with me, because when I was spending all of that coding, you're coding in if thens, if X then Y, and if you're in the development field and you do theories of change, it's all if then. So that resonated with me. And I think, in Tagalog, there's a value called utang na loob. And because we're so dramatic as Filipinos, it translates to the debt of one's soul. And it means to sort of, to be forever indebted to someone. And I think when I read the If Then Ambassador program and the target group, the middle school, that's when I, started to love learning, because I encountered teachers during that age who I just thought were cool and really invested themselves in us. And the mentorship of my teachers is something that I can't repay. And the best way to sort of approximate my sort of payback to them and gratitude is to be a mentor to others.
Well, you know that here at the STEMinista Project, we are all about mentors and role models. So you fit right in at home, because that is such a powerful thing to us. We know that representation matters, and we also know that mentoring piece is really, really critical to children in general, but especially girls who often don't see themselves in STEM fields or STEM adjacent fields. And so we definitely understand the power of mentoring. While we're talking about the work that you do now, I would love if you would tell the audience a little bit more about the data and research that you're doing within child and forced labor. It's a topic that we have not encountered yet, so I am excited for you to really share how your research impacts that particular issue.
Sure. No, thanks for asking that question, Andrea. And I think, if we think about how we move about our regular day, whether it's using a spoonful of sugar in our morning coffee to eat breakfast, putting the clothes that we wear, the iPhones that we use, child labor or forced labor touches us on an everyday basis. When we think about who is making the food we eat and the clothes we wear at the very bottom of the supply chain, they are children, they are workers. And so my research for the last 20 years has been working to show who they are, their faces, their numbers, prevalence, measuring them, what risks, factors bring them to these situations, and then what are ways to prevent child labor and forced labor from happening, whether it's through policies or programs. So for the first 20 years of my career, I had the great and fortunate opportunity to work at the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Child Labor, Forced Labor, and Human Trafficking. When I finished my doctoral program, I became their inaugural chief of policy and research. And one of the things that mighty, small but mighty office does is produce annual reports, 1,000 pages a year. And so we worked with innovation fellows who were experienced in tech to take all of that research, encode it and put it in an app. So people can download it if they want more information. It's called Sweat and Toil. And it includes about 140 countries.
That's amazing. I don't know many people who've made apps, and I especially know many people who've done work in this very particular field. So again, thank you for sharing that and how that data impacts that research. That's really, really critical. So while we're talking about, again, the work that you do, I know that there's a little bit of a debate around like the social sciences and whether it's truly science. So I guess my question is, do you believe that it truly is science? My opinion obviously is a yes, but that's because all of my formal education has been in social sciences. So I know all of the data and research and paper writing and everything that goes into the work that many of us do, but I would love to hear your opinion about it too.
Yes, social science is research. And I think it's interesting, how we value the sciences, whether it's the natural sciences, and the moment you apply it to people in underprivileged situations, people begin to question, is this science? There is a method behind the madness. We follow the scientific method. We develop hypotheses. We run statistics, conceptual frameworks. And so if one is responsible, I think, in this day and age, it's really hard to trust numbers. But if you are a steward of data, then there is no doubt that there is a science and an objectivity that comes to the research that you do. I mean, it is what makes, ensuring that whether it's the news, research, data, facts, that there is an integrity behind it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's something that those who work in the social sciences, continue to talk about and advocate for. So I appreciate your opinion being added to that. And while I'm thinking about it, to our audience, if you have questions for Charita, please ask us in the chat box, either on Facebook or YouTube. I know that she would be more than happy to answer your questions. But while we're waiting for any questions from our audience, I have another question, of course. I am really interested in knowing, on your STEM journey, many of us, of course, encounter self-doubt and feeling like, we don't belong in the spaces that we often end up. I want to know, have you ever felt like that? And if so, what were the ways that you coped with feeling like that and being in those positions?
So I've been thinking quite a lot about this because, there's a lot of discussion, whether it's among women, people of color, or others who identify with different sexual orientation, and they talk about imposter syndrome. So let me kind of go back for a second. I'll come back to that. I think feelings of self-doubt, definitely. I think, any normal human being who doesn't doubt themselves, I would question. So I think there's a healthy amount of self-doubt that anyone should have. As I was going through my doctoral program, I wasn't a trained, I didn't take a lot of statistical science classes in undergrad or even my MSW program. It didn't come until my doctoral program. So I feel like in some ways I had to really work at it and struggle through it. And I remember I was a class of 6. I was the only female. And the teacher had said, so a student got this wrong. I'm not going to state the student's name, but she, X, Y, and Z. And I remember feeling this great sense of embarrassment. Of course, one, you're the only one that got it wrong. And then one, you've identified me. And so on this other thing about imposter syndrome, I was raised to be a proud Filipina. You know, I was that child who didn't care. I would bring the stinky foods to school that other people thought were stinky. I was like, whatever, you don't know what you're missing. And when you look at the sort of definition of imposter syndrome, it's that you feel like you don't belong. And I almost want to sort of turn that around and kind of dig deeper and question, is it more internalized sexism or internalized racism? Is our feelings more that other people don't think we belong? Because my mother raised me to say I belong. So I think whether it's us as academics or showing up in a professional workspace, I'd like for us to talk more about this imposter syndrome, because the embracing of it is, I think it's detrimental in some ways.
Yeah, I appreciate your feedback on that. You know, we've talked a lot about imposter syndrome within, you know, various events and discussion panels that we've hosted within the STEMinista project, and I've never quite heard that perspective, but I definitely appreciate it. I definitely think there is more to talk about that. So maybe at some other point, would join us again, maybe on one of our panels when we talk about that, because I think it's really important to have various perspectives on the same issue when really discussing and diving deep into how we can support one another as we all try to, you know, move forward in the various spaces that we are trying to dominate, if you will, or to just be a part of. So thank you again for.
Yeah, and if it's okay, I'd just like to share an example of how this plays out. When we know ourselves, when we have confidence in our work, what can happen when we show up and advocate for ourselves? So, you know, I was doing my doctoral program at the same time that I was working full time, and I was working with, you know, top scientists and researchers at the International Labor Organization in Geneva who were working to measure child labor. Of course, I had such high regard for them. You know, they were 20, 30 years in the field of statistics, economics. Who am I as this newbie coming onto the stage? But what I did know is that I went down a rabbit hole. I went down a rabbit hole to figure out how to measure hazardous work for children. So as they were developing their resolution on child labor statistics and how to measure it, I think I probably was not as confident to say it in front of a room of regarded scientists and researchers. But what I did was I took the chief statistician aside. He was leading the negotiations for the resolution. I took him aside and I said, I have an idea that I want to share with you. I sat with him and he said, of course. And he took that part of my dissertation and integrated it into this international resolution. You know, and 20 years later, him and I have been working side by side on doing the measurement guidelines on forced labor. So it's like when you have that feeling in your gut and you're feeling like you don't want to say anything, say something.
For sure. I love that. Thank you for saying that. I think that that's really important information and advice that we would want to leave with the girls that we are all working to inspire. I think it's important just to, you know, not listen to that little voice sometimes that tells you not to speak up in that moment. and squash it and do what you need to do. I've heard that voice many, many times in my own lifetime. Even though, like yourself, I, had parents that raised me to be proud of who I was and own every space that I was able to have an opportunity to be a part of. But sometimes, those external factors can certainly make you doubt yourself. But I appreciate you encouraging us just to speak up and speak out. Thank you again for that. I think as we get ready to wrap up here, you've already given us some really great advice, but I would love to hear any advice that you would love to leave our STEMinista girls with. Maybe a young lady who is considering pursuing a career in STEM or the social sciences as a whole, or just, living her daily life. What's the best advice that you can leave us with?
I think the best advice that I could leave girls with is to listen to themselves and really listen. Things are so busy. We didn't grow up with iPhones and apps and Instagram and all that. And so to find that quiet space, really take time to figure out when you are doing in something, when you're in the moment, whether it's a subject at school, a hobby, like how does that feel inside you? Does it increase your energy? Does it make you feel excited? And, follow your heart, because I think like when you follow your heart, I believe you have the brain, and your brain and your heart can connect to do great things. And the other thing that I will say, and I pulled this out, I think that sometimes people think that we as professionals have our act together, or we're not silly or whatever. For those who know me, I'm really weird. And I have this poster that says "Stay weird," and I think, so I want girls to know that they can embrace their full selves. Other people will, embrace them. Of course, you should show up professionally, but that you're in the right place. And I knew this when I was also at the U.S. Department of Labor, when I left and to pursue, another a career path. And I knew I was at the right place, because in my going away, my boss bought me a Hello Kitty dress, and we did rock, paper, scissors and a panda outfit, and so those things can coexist, but always first show up professionally, and then you can like slam the weird on them.
I absolutely love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that was the highlight of my entire day. I'm going to look for one of those signs, because I think it's so perfect for myself and many other people I know, including my husband, who'll probably kill me for saying that. But I love that. Just staying weird, embrace the weird, right? May term it as being a nerd or whatever it is. But I think the ultimate thing to take away from the words that you just gave is just be yourself, and that those spaces and places that you belong in, they will find you, and your people, your tribe, those people who get you, they will find you also. So thank you so much for sharing that. I would love, again, as we wrap up here, would you tell our audience how they can find you, how they can stay connected to you if they're interested in learning more about what you're doing in the field? How can they reach out to you?
Sure, thank you. So I am on LinkedIn. You can find me under my name, Charita Castro. I am in the process with working on a website called www.nchildlabor.com, where you can find other resources and talks that I've done. And I'm a forever friend of the STEMinista project. So if you all need me, please know that you can reach out. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and I will definitely take you up on that, because I love all that you bring to the table, including all of your research and, of course, your amazing personality, but also just your ability to encourage and inspire all of us, regardless of where we are in our lives. I think you're story resonates with so many people who may have started off one way, but are ending up, with really, really powerful stories to tell, whether it's a part of a STEM journey or not. So thank you so much for joining us today. To our audience, please, please, please stay connected with us even after this interview. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Instagram at STEMinista Project. It's STEMinista.project. Please reach out to us if you're interested in doing work with us or interested in doing an interview with us, because we love hearing your STEM stories. So thank you again, Charita, for your time and your expertise today. And I hope to